Okay, everybody. Good morning. Happy Monday. Thanks to everybody for joining. We're here today to host our latest edition of the EG4 webinar series, Unlocking the Grid Boss, where we're going to spend some time talking about the features, the benefits, and the application cases of EG4 Smart Microgrid Interconnection Device, the Grid Boss. For those of you who I haven't had the pleasure to meet, my name is Dylan Rupp, Director of Marketing here at EG4. I'm joined by my colleague, my friend, Joel Openshaw. Joel, want to introduce yourself?
Hi, yeah, Joel Openshaw. I am the technical sales manager. I've got a team of technical account managers who are assigned to, be the trainers, be that white glove treatment for installers who want to get to know our equipment, who want to design using it, and maybe have some more in-depth technical questions that wouldn't quite be direct for tech support, and want more of that information up front for in-depth designs and really bulletproof systems.
Awesome. Yeah, so Joel's team is a phenomenal resource. If you guys haven't had the chance to link up with any of our technical sales team members, couldn't recommend them more. They will certainly ensure that you guys are successful on the very front end of your project with the design of that solution, all the way through the actual turning on of that solution with commissioning and ensuring that solution's been deployed to effectively meet the application case that you're after. So please leverage Joel and his team if you haven't already. They're, like I said, an invaluable resource for us here at EG4. For those of you who haven't had the chance to join us at webinars in the past, just some quick housekeeping items here. We do have a chat feature built in. Would love for you guys to comment in there, give us some feedback as you see fit. However, we do have a separate questions tab if you do have some questions that you want to get answered as we go through the course of the webinar. Joel or myself, whichever one of us is not actively presenting at any moment in time, will be in there answering questions, and we have some additional EG4 team members who might jump in there. Please use that questions tab for any questions that you might have. If you use the chat feature, it might get answered, it might not. More importantly, we might miss it or have other individuals in the audience with the same question miss it and not get the answer that you guys are after as we go through this webinar here today. With that, really excited to be here talking about what I really view as one of the most innovative and best products that we offer here at EG4, our GridBOSS microgrid interconnection device. So just a quick agenda, what we're going to go through today. We're going to go for about an hour here, so please stick around to the end and make sure you ask any questions as they come up through the course of the presentation. We might move a little bit quickly because we do have a lot of slides, and if we finish early, we're happy to give you back the rest of your afternoon or morning, depending on where you're joining us from. Going to start out here very briefly, talk about who we are at EG4. Hopefully for a lot of you, this isn't your first exposure to EG4, though if there are some of you that's the case, really excited to have you here learning about some of our solutions that we offer. Then we'll kind of jump into the GridBOSS. We'll talk about it as an actual solution, some of the things that it has integrated into it, what it's used for, and then we'll get a little bit more granular with the actual design, installation of that solution, its ease of use, the ways that we think it can save you cost on an install while unlocking a lot of the features that we're going to talk about in the front end. And at the very back end of the presentation here, we'll get a little bit more into some specific application cases that we find of particular value with this solution set. So again, I've said it 2 or 3 times already. As you have those questions, please ask them. Please let us answer those questions that you find most pressing. We're all here to learn today. So certainly don't walk away from this webinar without enabling us to teach you something you might have not already known about EG4 and about the GridBOSS product. So EG4 is committed to the mission that's been set forth and literally built into the name of the company. EG4, for those of you that haven't heard it before, literally stands for energy generation for everyone. And that really is what this company has been about since the time I started here, is developing and deploying products and solutions that are not only affordable for the US market and the Canadian market, but incredibly beneficial and usable for our customer base. We've been around since 2020, trying to execute on that mission and have had considerable success with over 800 megawatt hours of storage capacity deployed across the North American market to date. We certainly have some exciting new products that we're bringing to market here in the near future, so we're excited to talk about those as well. But specifically today, I want to spend some time talking about our GridBOSS solution. Like I said at the top, this is truly my favorite product in our product portfolio. Frankly, it's the product that when I was thinking about potentially joining EG4 from my previous role, the product that I looked at and said, yeah, this is a company I want to work for. This is a company who's doing things in a unique and new way. And I really recognize the vision and the value behind this product. Hopefully I can share some of that with the rest of the audience here today. You've heard me refer to it a couple times now as our microgrid interconnection device. You'll also hear us say MID, which is just an acronym standing for microgrid interconnection device. But what that is defined as per the NEC is a device that enables a microgrid system to separate from and reconnect to an interconnected primary power source, e.g. the grid in most instances. Now, what that means in more practical terms is the MID is simply a relay that will open or close under the appropriate conditions to adhere to the relevant grid interconnection standards and requirements. Now, the location and the size of that interconnection relay have significant impacts to the system design, the architecture, and the amount of loads that can be reasonably backed up or powered by any ESS. So certainly the EG4 GridBOSS's primary function is to act as this interconnection device. However, as we'll see over the course of this presentation, the equipment's been intelligently designed to streamline that installation and bring some additional features and functionalities to the system to help optimize those installations. So really, truly more than just that interconnection device, the GridBOSS has been engineered to remove the requirements for significant balance of system components to complete an energy storage system installation, especially when you compare it against solutions that leverage an internal MID like our legacy 18K PV and some other popular hybrid inverter solutions on the market. Now, the way we go about engineering out some of that balance of system requirement is by integrating the functionality of multiple components that are traditionally used to support energy storage systems into that single GridBOSS device. And we'll actually see what that looks like internal to the GridBOSS in just a moment. So actually what's inside. So if you go ahead and open up the cover of the GridBOSS, you'll see a bunch of interconnection locations where you can add overcurrent protection to add additional power sources, potentially loads, or other functionality in the GridBOSS. Calling some of those out specifically and talking a little bit more about what they do, each one has been numbered here in this graphic with the associated functionality kind of called out here on the left hand of the slide. Starting out, you're going to see on the very right-hand side of the GridBOSS here, a 200 amp service rated grid connection. And that's going to replace your traditional 200 amp fuse disconnect in most installations as that service entrance rated point and that first point of disconnection. Now, in order to have this unit act as a service entrance rated piece of equipment, you do need to source an appropriately listed breaker. Shame on me, I didn't actually put the model number in the slide here, but that is an Eaton CR250 breaker. Follow up with us and or maybe Joel can throw in the chat the appropriate model number there. But you do need to source that Eaton breaker in order for this device to be rated as a service entrance rated piece of equipment. Now that does give you some flexibility to have a different service entrance rated device and forego the addition of that Eaton breaker as an external component. But having that there does give you some additional installation efficiencies that are pretty easy to capture. Now, I'll also go ahead, Joel.
Yeah, if you're installing onto a system that already has a 200 amp disconnect, you're not going to be required. Dylan was correct. It is the CR2 Eaton breakers you're looking for there that are going to be compatible with our GridBOSS, as well as, I guess, we'll jump into the other ports there, but we'll also be compatible with Eaton breakers.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you, Joel. And I'll also mention here, like Joel just alluded to, you might already have that first means of disconnect or certain AHJs. We've certainly encountered this we'll say, hey, NEC code might allow that GridBOSS to act as that service entrance point of interconnection. We, in our local jurisdiction, require a knife blade disconnection. So do always make sure you're leveraging conversations with your AHJ on the design side so you don't get surprised on inspection day that, hey, we actually need to have a knife blade disconnect here for that disconnecting means for the energy storage system. The second thing I'm going to call out here is a 125 amp generator connection point and auto start capability built into this GridBOSS. That's going to act as and replace your traditional generator ATS or automatic transfer switch and give you a really easy way to interconnect a generator to the system and also control when that generator starts and stops based on things like the energy storage system state of charge. There's a 200 amp manual bypass built directly into this GridBOSS, a physical switch that can be flipped in the instance of a need to bypass the energy storage system and run that home directly off of utility power. That might come about in the instance of some kind of equipment service requirement. Maybe you're performing a firmware update and you don't want to have the system be flashing with frequent outages that your loads will be susceptible to. So that gives you a really quick, easy way to bypass the ESS should that ever become a necessity. Like we'll see in a few slides from now, with other hybrid inverter systems with an internal MID, that replaces a very costly, very large double pull, double throw bypass transfer switch that significantly increases complexity and cost of an installation, but couldn't be more valuable to have in the system, especially should you need it in the event of some kind of service requirement on the ESS. A 200 amp backup load output is built directly into the system to enable you to go ahead and back up 200 amps worth of load with the system. Of course, your backup capability is going to be determined by the number of inverters and batteries that you've deployed on site. However, this GridBOSS device is rated to enable a full 200 amp load center to be backed up without any additional considerations. We've integrated 3 90 amp inverter connections directly into this GridBOSS. That replaces what you see with a lot of systems in the market requiring external combiner panels where you need to have a single point where the output of multiple inverters is actually combined to a single source before you take it to the rest of the home's loads to be distributed back out across your branch circuits. Again, significantly decreases installation complexity by giving a single piece of equipment that enables up to 3 inverters to be paralleled right at the device with no extra balance of system. And then finally, the last thing worth mentioning here is the unit features 4 smart ports to unlock intelligent energy management, which would traditionally require something like a smart panel to be deployed on site. Not only can that act as a means to actually manage loads on site, it'll also give the ability to attach non-traditional power sources like maybe an AC coupled solar system that exists already into the EG4 energy storage system and have that power source be controlled by the system, again, based on the considerations of the system, things like state of charge of the battery. Again, significantly reduces what you're going to see with other energy storage systems offering that capability by building that all in. Now, like Joel mentioned before, you do need to consider the overcurrent protection requirements for these different points of connection of either power sources or loads. The GridBOSS is compatible with both BSB breakers, which can be purchased through your distribution partner that carries EG4 equipment. That's a specific breaker type that was designed to pair with the GridBOSS, or we also support Eaton BR breakers, which can generally be purchased off the shelf at any big box retailer or any electrical distributor that your team likes to do business with. Now, getting away from the actual device itself and starting to talk about how this unit simplifies design and streamlines installation. I'm going to turn it over to Joel here as our applications specialist to actually talk about some of these different design cases and how the GridBOSS becomes an extremely powerful piece of equipment.
Oh, thank you. So yeah, the first thing we'll look at is what your traditional system will look like if you are doing multiple inverters and you're not utilizing a GridBOSS. This, can look like a spider web on the page. And believe me, this is far from the most complicated system that we see here at EG4. But this isn't out of the ordinary either. We especially over the last 5 years in this market, before the GridBOSS is truly available to the public, these type of situations were extremely common. And we'll get into the complexity of having AC coupled solar, right? There's going to be a lot of different integrations that are going to need to happen. So in this case here, we're going to take our FlexBOSS 18Ks, right? We're going to have multiple pieces of power flowing into it. We're going to have batteries. We're going to have a bank we're trying to charge. And in this case, we can actually couple our AC solar, existing solar already on that system, maybe from a SolarEdge or an Enphase, some other brand of solar already existing on site. Couple those in. You can have a grid combiner. So you're going to add an additional panel on site to combine all of your hybrid inverters. You are going to have a generator ATS, which should be brand on brand with the generator you're using. And as well, hopefully you'll have a manual bypass to create a degree of serviceability for the site. This is a very functional system, and I know there's a lot of people out in the world who currently have this set up on their homes, and it will work. For an installer, I would say this is extremely far from ideal if I'm an installer and I'm approaching a potential customer on how I'm going to make money. A project like this is very difficult to make money on because your labor costs are going to be extremely high. You're going to be adding a lot of little bits and bobs that aren't really going to grow margin for your business or for your company. A generator ATS is not a big line item. You're not going to be taking home very much profit on something like that. But what you can do, right, is hopefully minimize your install and get it to something that makes a little bit more sense, which is where the GridBOSS really excels. So going from this very complicated situation here, multiple transfer switches, bypasses, ATS, combiners on every side of it, and then stepping into the GridBOSS. And we'll kind of show what that one looks like here. So again, we have the exact same number of components on site here, right? We're still AC coupling existing solar. We still have a generator, and we're still trying to back up that load. And even in this case, we still have our 2 batteries and our 2 inverters, right? But instead of having to wire in transfer switches, bypasses, you have a single point where all of your AC connections are going to be controlled and accessible. So our existing solar is going to land into our smart port. Our generator is going to land on our dedicated generator port with its 2-wire control. Our grid ports, dedicated. Our load output, dedicated. And then we have 2 hybrid inverters landing on their dedicated hybrid inverter ports. Single system, extremely easy to commission and configure, and it simplifies the wire runs, the conduits on the wall, and the schematics. You wouldn't believe how many of those, even on my home, I actually had to do a similar system to the one before. And with the transfer switches and additional ATSs, you'd be surprised how quickly you can end up drawing loops that shouldn't be there with an electrical system. The one we showed was a very good example. They don't always come out that clean. So the GridBOSS is definitely a savior on our design and commissioning side there. Definitely simplifies things for you.
Absolutely. Well said. So delving into some actual cost breakdown of what this might look like, leveraging the GridBOSS versus a hybrid inverter solution that uses an internal 200 amp MID. Really, that is the primary concern that we hear as it relates to deploying the GridBOSS, is the quote unquote added cost of the MID solution and how that's already built in to something like our 18K PV, which has that internal 200 amp solution. But when you really delve in to the cost and consider more than just the cost of the inverter and the MID itself, and start looking at that AC balance of system, it becomes apparent that the GridBOSS really saves significant costs on install day in both the equipment, but also the labor that's required to deploy that technology in the field. So this slide kind of aims to show that and really gives you some cost figures that are based on up-to-date consumer level pricing. Transparently pulled from Home Depot for the most part. So if you have problems with the numbers here, take it up with Home Depot. You can certainly let me know as well, and we'll maybe look at updating. But Really, when you look at the additional switchgear that comes into consideration to deploy this hybrid inverter technology with an internal MID as a whole home backup, you're going to easily be adding nearly $2,000 in additional cost between things like that double pull, double throw, 200 amp manual bypass switch. Those often run well over $1,000. I was actually surprised to be able to find one for $1,100. And so that's what I put into this analysis, just to be fair to this solution. You're gonna need a 200 amp service entrance rated disconnect, which is gonna mean you're also gonna need to source some kind of overcurrent protection. And then you're gonna have to have some taps or Polaris connectors and a junction box to kind of house that connection point to enable all these different power sources to kind of be combined to, one, feed into the grid side of the system, but then also feed into the kind of grid side of that manual bypass switch to give you that bypass capability. Now, in order for that internal MID to support the 200 amps worth of power that it's rated to have pass through it, the conductors, both to and from the inverter, the line and the load side, need to be rated for 200 amps as well. If we're using copper, that means we need to go ahead and specify 2-watt copper conductors. And since we're running it both on that line and load side of the inverter, we essentially have to run 3 conductors the length of our run and do it twice, right? Once for the line side, once for the load side. So 3 conductors, L1, L2 neutral, once for line, once for load, essentially 6 times. If we assume a $5 per foot cost for 2-watt copper, which is honestly a little bit low potentially, and we consider that we're running that 30 feet 6 times, adding conduit with that, you easily are going to rack up over $1,000 in conductor costs when you deploy this technology with the internal MID in the solution. And then finally, we do have a labor adder here. You guys are going to probably give me a hard time. I'm sure the chat's already saying that's the wrong number to use. It is a low number. Realistically, the intent there was simply to represent the additional labor that would be required for mounting this balance of system componentry as well as the inverter itself. And we wanted to really have this comparison be about the equipment as opposed to the labor, so we didn't want to put a huge number in there. Certainly this will vary project by project, region by region, and then as you start to add in all the additional aspects of deploying an energy storage system, that labor number will be significantly higher when you consider things like installing the battery, commissioning the system, installing the solar, etc. That said, all this information taken together on, again, the AC integration only of one of these energy storage systems, providing a 200 amp whole home backup, the cost to deploy a 200 amp internal MID based solution is going to run well over $8,000 when you also include the cost of the inverter. And that's, of course, before we add costs of the storage, the solar, like I said, some of those other things that are going to be integral and important to an energy storage system. Though I will say, generally speaking, those costs are going to be pretty consistent whether you're deploying an internal versus an external MID-based solution. Now, let's compare that to our GridBOSS, FlexBOSS installation, or an energy storage system installation using the GridBOSS device. What we'll see is we are going to have an increased cost of the inverter plus MID technology for this solution. It was about a $5,000 line item on the previous slide. Here it's over $6,000 because we have that $2,000 GridBOSS interconnection device. But when you start looking at the rest of that balance of system required, you more than make up for that $2,000 in, we'll say, additional cost by the savings that are introduced here. So in this install scheme, we only see $200 more in overcurrent protection device costs as a service entrance rated input of the GridBOSS and the manual bypass switch replace that fuse disconnect and the double pull, double throw manual transfer switch that we saw on the previous slide. Well over $1,000 in savings right there. Further, because we only have to run a single conductor between the inverter and the MID, and that conductor only carries the power output of the inverter itself, we're able to use not only less runs of conductor, but a much smaller conductor size, because again, we're only carrying, with a FlexBOSS 21, 90 amps worth of continuous output, as opposed to the 200 amps worth of capacity that we had to support with that internal MID. At about $2 per foot cost for 3-gauge copper, again, a 30-foot run, and again, 3 lines that we're running, that's going to put us a little over $200 for that conductor run. And guys, this is just pretty basic physics, right? There's 2.5 times as much copper in a 2-watt conductor as compared to a 3-gauge conductor. You're going to pay for that on install day. When you have to run it twice, you pay for it twice, right? Because that GridBOSS is going to sit right between the meter and the load center, there's little to no requirement to run additional large conductors, as a lot of that site wiring already on premises can get reused. Ideally, you can just intercept it and not add any conductor, or if you have to add some conductor, it's generally going to be pretty minimal as compared to what you might see, again, with those internal MID-based solutions. And then from a labor perspective, again, not representative of a whole system install, just the additional AC additions here. We assumed a $500 adder, only a $100 decrease, despite that probably being significantly more with the reduction in components that are going on the wall here. And again, we're doing this to really let the equipment comparison stand on its own, even though we do believe those labor savings are significantly less. And we've done studies that consider more than just the AC side that show a much lower labor number when you're deploying this GridBOSS-based solution. So that puts our all-in cost for the GridBOSS-based deployment at a little over $7,000, about $7,100, which is a 15% savings compared to our internal MID solution that we saw before. And all of this is before we even account for the load shedding capability of the GridBOSS. If you were to go buy that as something off the shelf, a solution off the shelf, you're going to pay over $2,000 for that solution almost every single time. That capability, that functionality is included directly in that GridBOSS. And so if you really want to add that in, you could argue that the cost of ownership for this GridBOSS solution is a little over $5,000 to deploy this technology. But again, for comparison's sake, that $7,000 is a pretty good benchmark that we can use to compare to that internal MID-based solution. And then for those who maybe want to just pursue the lowest cost install, which is again a piece of pushback that we do see fairly frequently, you're still going to start to see savings, or essentially the same cost of a deployment with the GridBOSS as compared to this kind of quote unquote lowest cost installation with that 200 amp internal MID. Under this scenario, where we're going to eliminate the 200 amp manual bypass, eliminate the taps and the junction box that enable that, we're still going to see that significantly increased cost from the multiple 2-watt conductor runs. We're still going to have to deploy some kind of service entrance rated disconnect prior to hitting the grid input of our hybrid inverter. None of these hybrid inverters are service entrance rated in the device themselves. It's again a physics problem. It's just too large physically of a requirement to actually fit in the inverter itself. And you might save a little bit on labor, although again, arguable that it's probably going to look pretty similar to what you have with the GridBOSS itself there. But even with those savings, pulling out some of those more expensive balance of system components, your all-in cost only saves you a little less than $300. And for that, you've essentially locked yourself into this deployment. Future expansion is going to be significantly more difficult. It's going to be more expensive to expand in the future if that's something that potentially wants to be pursued by yourself or the client. And more importantly than that, you're going to significantly reduce the reliability of this solution. Certainly, we don't want to talk about failures or assume there's going to be a failure, but it would be unrealistic to pretend like they never happen. Under this scenario, if you do have a failure of the energy storage system, because all of the home's power is run through that ESS, the home will be without power for as long as that failure mode is active. What that means as an installer is you're getting an urgent service call, and any savings that you captured by not using the GridBOSS with this deployment are immediately lost multiple times over in the form of truck rolls, especially if those are coming during the off hours. And as you add capability and as you add power output, this analysis gets even more robust and tips further in favor of the GridBOSS as a device. So again, with an internal MID, we talked about the requirement to start to add things like combiner panels, which enable you to split the incoming power source or recombine the outgoing power source of multiple inverters. So those can all act as a single system. That adds equipment costs in the form of load centers and pretty large breakers. It adds labor costs because you have to go now mount that load center. You have to run extra conduit to it, pull extra conductors to it. Each one of those combiners, and you might have one for the incoming grid, you might have one for a generator or for an AC coupled existing solar system. You could even have one on the output depending on the inverter technology you're using, although the better ones are going to have some overcurrent protection built in that enable you to just use a lower cost tap and junction box to combine that load output of the system. But each time you do that, you're going to add anywhere from a couple $100 to $500–600 more in cost per source. Taken all together, paralleling internal MID hybrid inverters generally is going to add at least $2,000 or more in additional balance of system components and the additional labor to deploy those additional components. Now, again, compared with our parallel application case with a GridBOSS, it becomes very easy. The added BOS cost to parallel additional GridBOSS is the cost of running one additional conductor over to that GridBOSS. Again, recall, we already had that panel board built into the GridBOSS that enabled you to go ahead and parallel 3 inverters. We had that dedicated input for something like a generator, a dedicated input for the AC coupled solar, and that will be distributed equally and the power flow optimized between the different hybrid inverters deployed on site there at the GridBOSS itself. And then should you think, hey, maybe in the future, as these technologies continue to improve, some of these costs will go away, that's probably true for the equipment. It's probably not true for those conductors and that balance of system. A lot of those components are commodity-based prices. And if you guys have been following the price of metals in the last year, you'll be aware that the price of copper is up. I pulled this morning, 40% for the last year. The price of aluminum up nearly 20% for the last year. With the rising rates of electrification, I certainly would expect these costs to certainly at least stay level, if not to continue to rise in the future, which again is going to mean that balance of system will continue to be more expensive in the future. Now, some more exciting stuff. This GridBOSS really unlocks some exciting and fun application cases that we want to share with you during the webinar today. And again, I'm going to turn it over to Joel here as our application specialist on the webinar and let him talk about some of these different deployment cases and kind of how we see the GridBOSS optimizing for those.
Awesome. Thank you. I think one of the most common things installers come to EG4 for is when you have a customer who's already got existing solar. Maybe 5 years ago someone came by and sold them a handful of microinverters and slapped them on the roof, right? And those were the heydays, I think, for a lot of installers. You just go out there and slap up glass. Don't worry about backup. We're just going to land them into some main panel. Keep it under 30 amps, so we're not doing panel upgrades, and move on. I think there are thousands upon thousands of systems like that currently in the market. A lot of those homeowners, a lot of people who made that decision early, right? These early movers within the market are now recognizing that their solar system alone isn't really enough, that they also need storage to be a part of it. And so although they're really happy with the production of their solar, they're looking to add to it. They're looking to upgrade to have a full home power system. So when you're going to jump into a situation like that, having something like a GridBOSS and an EG4 system is going to simplify that dramatically. Everything we do is made to integrate simply and reliably with our own equipment and with additional power generation equipment that may be on site, including microinverters or old string inverters that may already be existing. You can see some of these cost comparisons here with the EG4 system versus some of the other, I would say, AC coupled solar options, right? You have your Enphase 10T and a Franklin A-Power 2, both of which I think are regarded as pretty good systems, especially considering, that they go along with their microinverters. But you'll see the overall system cost ends up being dramatically expensive. Their battery costs are higher, I would say largely because they're not doing a DC coupled battery system. It's one of the ways that EG4 really, really helps drive value to its customers. Our design in our ecosystem is driven to get power into the hands of everybody. And one of the best ways we can do that is to keep the price from being a barrier. We consider our products premium in what they do, but we don't consider them premium in how much they should cost, right? We consider the value to the very front of things. So when you're comparing here, you'll see the inverter cost here is something that we're going to represent in our system, because in the Enphase and the Franklin systems, those inverters on that cost are actually wrapped into their battery costs. But when you look at your number of batteries increasing and you're trying to grow your storage, those numbers are going to even out very rapidly, and EG4 is going to come out on top when it comes to price and value every time. And this isn't even referencing the simplicity of having a dedicated port just for AC coupling, and knowing that your integration is already taken into account for maybe this third-party AC power device is very significant, making that plug and play. There's not very many places you can integrate other companies' hardware in a plug and play fashion. And not just on the AC coupling, we also have the generator integration. And this is a very, very unique situation, being able to do both of those at the same time. Getting away from our hybrid inverters, I'd say there's legacy products where everything is built into one. You're kind of left with an either or, right? I've got a generator port, and I can either put AC coupled solar into it, or I could put my generator into it. You couldn't do both. Now that you have the GridBOSS, again, you have dedicated generator import, and you have 4 dedicated smart ports that can take the AC coupled solar or act as their load shedding devices. I see a lot of installers who come across these situations, and they're desperate to sell these jobs because these jobs usually have customers who are willing to pay for it. They know what they're looking for because they've already invested in their home energy system twice, 2 different times. These are people who are willing to spend money, who have already spent money, and they are looking for specific expectations of their system that they have not yet received, right? It's the reliability and it's the cleanness, right? They want to know that they're going to have the battery power no matter what. They know that, hey, the sun won't always shine, and so I'm going to have a generator here just in case to amend it, but that's going to be secondary. So you're going to have a pile of very motivated customers. I think customers that are oftentimes a lot, I won't say easier to sell because there's more integration that's going to be required. But what we do is we take this from being an extremely custom job, extremely custom integration. I think if you think back about those previous slides where you saw all those different combiner boxes, it goes from having to design that from scratch on every home, taking into account their windows, gutters, attics, and what's available, into saying, hey, I've got a GridBOSS, and it's all going to land here, and my runs are going to be simple, and they're going to be light. Let's take a look at this next slide here. That kind of shows on a larger home what those runs may look like with your GridBOSS. So here we're just taking an example of some random standard home footprint. And you can see, right, we have an ESS location, and we have inside the garage, right, the nice little red box there. And then on the right side of the home, you'll see a meter, and that's where the main panel would be. Sun is fantastic when it's hitting your solar panels. Sun is not fantastic when it's hitting batteries. Rain is not fantastic when it's hitting batteries. When you're having homeowners who are making an investment of the tens of thousands of dollars, my recommendation is always trying to give that system and that equipment as much protection as possible. We do sell equipment that is outdoor rated. We have batteries that have heaters internal and can handle cold temperatures. We have batteries that are outdoor rated. Again, these are always going to be an investment, and I always recommend that you protect these investments for your customer. The smartest thing you can do is make sure that these pieces of equipment are in a safe and shielded location. So in the garage is oftentimes a great place to do that. But again, you can see in this situation, although your meter and your panel are on the side of the house, that's going to be a very difficult run. This is actually personally how my own home is wired. I will say it took an entire day of labor to get the, again, because we're talking about either a 2-aught or a 3-aught run, depending on what your HJ is going to require you. A lot of times it's going to be a 2-aught cable or copper cable run in each direction, right, for this entire service. In my house, that was about 60, 70 feet in one direction. That's a lot of copper, that's a lot of conduit. But when you think about why that labor took the entire day, it's because essentially they had, you know, an 18 and a 19-year-old trying to bend rebar. 4-aught copper cable, unless you're getting the really expensive stuff, which is fine strand, is going to be very difficult to bend. It's going to be very difficult to pull through conduit. I mean, it could literally take nearly industrial style equipment to get it where you need it to be. And so I'll say in my own house, it was an entire day of labor for more than 2 people to get that run made. And they didn't even get both directions done. It took them the second day before they got that return done. I actually I don't even know if they used the full output on the run back. It was very expensive. It took a lot of time. And that's one of the great things about the GridBOSS, is getting away from custom integrations like that. So as we go to the GridBOSS integration, the battery and the inverter are in the same place. We have them properly protected for the homeowner, and they're inside the garage. But this time, right, we're taking a 3-gauge wire, right, and we're running a single run from the garage over to the inverter. You're no longer wrestling with rebar, trying to get those bent around corners, trying to get those pushed through the attic. You're not spending thousands of dollars on conductors. It's a single run, and it's going to simplify things dramatically. This is actually, you know, I am trying to retrofit my home into more of this situation. Currently, I have a third-party ATS on the side of my house instead of a GridBOSS, and it still requires both of those runs back and forth. And so one of the things that I'm very excited about getting rid of that ATS is getting back a true manual bypass on my house. So without having to drag 200 amps of conductors across my home, just adding my GridBOSS, even to a system that was already wired like that, is still going to be a legitimate upgrade for the service of my home and for the reliability of my home. Personally, I am very happy about. And I know my installer would have been much happier if I had him running the 3-gauge wire instead of 2 runs of 2-aught.
Your bank account would have as well, Joel.
I put that one on his contract. He was buying all of the wiring. I just told him where it had to go.
It's funny. This is a topic near and dear to both Joel and myself. I have the exact same scenario at my personal residence. I have an inverter with an internal MID that's in the garage. I have a meter on the outside of the house that's on the opposite side of the house. And so I have hundreds of feet worth of copper and conduit on the outside of my house with a big double pole, double throw bypass transfer switch and a big knife blade disconnect on the outside of my house, which costs a lot of money. And I didn't even know Joel was in the same situation. I was bemoaning my situation to him as we were getting ready for this webinar and how great the GridBOSS would have been when I did my install. And he was like, oh, I have the exact same thing. So it's more common than you might think if you haven't encountered it yet. Certainly it's something that in my days working on a design team, I saw a lot of and had to coach people and try to convince them that it wasn't as bad as it was with an internal based MID to have to be running all that copper or all those conductors twice and up through difficult to access spaces like a garage or maybe in a basement in some more northern locations.
And I'll say, you know, this is a little bit sidetracked. One of the things I intend to do with my home as I add my GridBOSS, because I have 2 big runs running across my home, I'm going to be utilizing one of those additional runs into my smart port. So essentially, I will have, a 240 volt load center within my garage that I can either hook up my welder, my EV charger to, what other goodies I want to put in my garage, and then have them be sheddable by my GridBOSS. And so, although it seems like I'm taking one step backwards, I'm still going to be benefiting in multiple ways by having that GridBOSS on site. So even though it's added to an existing system, still a significant step forward in the complexity and the reliability of that home.
Yeah, and I think the other place this is hugely beneficial, or where this application case just gets even more powerful, is scenarios where you might have ground mounts or separate structures with loads. Again, this solution has been designed to support those different application cases. And so you're going to have the run between the FlexBOSS and the GridBOSS, and that GridBOSS maybe is going to live by the main load cert in the home. But a common thing we see, especially in more rural communities, is customers might say, I have a barn, and that barn has a sub panel on it, and I'm putting the solar on the barn. How should I do this best? And so in the past, you'd have conductors all over the property, distribution panels that had to be added to support that situation. With the FlexBOSS GridBOSS combination, becomes incredibly easy. You simply can repurpose that run out to the sub panel at the barn to now be your inverter run from the GridBOSS. And then you can hook that sub panel directly up to the load port of the FlexBOSS, have that continue to be supported off grid, and you can still send power in an off grid situation back to that GridBOSS to go ahead and support maybe a panel at the main house on the property. So again, really unlocks some application cases where in the past customers were having to pay a significant portion of the system cost just to run additional conductors, just to maybe trench or add distribution panels, and really make for a mess for the installers on site, having to keep track of all those different conductor runs and all the added infrastructure that was going in to support that installation. Now, Joel's kind of alluded to it a couple of times. It's something that I think we both really, really like about this solution, and that's the ability of the GridBOSS to really act as an energy management system to increase your off-grid runtime with those smart ports and the load shedding capability that they unlock. Now, there's 4 smart ports, and so people sometimes say, well, hey, I thought I needed a full smart panel to support the load shedding capability. But really what we've seen as we've kind of delved into this topic and talked to some of our customers is you're going to be able to unlock something close to 80% of the load shedding capability of a traditional full smart panel solution at a significantly reduced cost when deploying this GridBOSS. And that's going to give you the ability to load shed most of those loads you need. Climate control is often between heating and cooling. Climate control is often 20 up to even 50% of the electric load of the home over time. Not only does that become a burden on the inverter itself, more importantly, it becomes a burden on the batteries. If you're in an extended outage and you're having to cool the home with a 5-ton HVAC like I do here in Texas, that's going to drain a battery system incredibly quickly. So it becomes beneficial to have the ability to turn that off. You might be a little warm in the home when that happens, but turn that load off until solar becomes available to recharge those batteries, at which point the system can be programmed to automatically and intelligently turn that back on based on battery state of charge and power availability. But we also see great candidates in water heating, laundry equipment. Both electric dryers and washing machines can pull a couple kilowatts in some instances. Of course, EV chargers are a huge energy consumer when they are running, as well as pumps and pool equipment. And oftentimes a lot of these things are discretionary. Climate control probably the least so, but these other aspects, water heating, your hot water will stay warm in its tank, even if it doesn't have a power input, as long as you're not using it. Certainly, generally speaking, laundry can wait, EV charging can wait, pumps, we can go hand skim or maybe turn on for a short period of time and then turn back off. But just to reiterate that point, the EIA does do analyses on where power is consumed in the home. And again, this kind of reinforces what we talked about previously, that climate control is a huge portion of what homes in the US are, or where the energy is being deployed on homes in the US. So having the intelligent control of that device is going to impact the longevity of that energy storage system significantly. It can sometimes increase the off-grid runtime of a solution by 30 to 40% just by that intelligent load control. Again, I've personally experienced that myself. I live in Houston. Hurricane Beryl rolled through a couple of years ago. My energy storage system is not adequate to keep up with my HVAC equipment. However, with some intelligent load control, I was able to stay powered with lights, internet, etc., for the duration of about a week while we were without power here in Houston because of that intelligent load control, something that I would have been sitting there in the dark every single day or manually managing my HVAC equipment had I not had that equipment. This same capability is going to lead to a streamlined compliance scenario. So certainly if you're to delve into NEC code and start reading certain sections as it relates to backup power sources, you'll see a couple of interesting areas. The first is 702.4A2, which states if the connection of a load is automatic, the backup resource should either have the ability to supply the full load calc of the load connected automatically. So that means if you have a 200 amp service, you probably have a load calc of about 200 amps. In theory, you would need 3 to 4 flex bosses to carry that full load. However, the alternate source is the standby source shall have the capability to sufficiently supply the maximum load that will be connected by an energy management system. So again, that intelligent load shedding capability enables you to be code compliant, deploy energy storage system with significantly reduced power capabilities from the solution. The other interesting one is the standalone supply shall be equal to or greater than the load posed by the largest single utilization equipment connected to the system. Again, common one we see where somebody might have something like the Ford Charge Pro EV charger, which is an 80 amp output charger. If you want to support 80 amps off grid, you're going to need multiple inverters to do so. You probably don't want to charge your EV when the grid is down. That's not the ideal time in my view, at least. Again, this load shedding capability allows you to still have that load be supported when the grid is up by the energy storage system, and then automatically shed when the grid goes down to be compliant to this code article. Now, I will say, certainly we see that this code is not enforced everywhere. It's not actually new additions to the code, but it's not stringently enforced everywhere. However, we have some areas, North Texas being probably the one I'm most familiar with, where this is a requirement. And it's a reason why a lot of smart panels are sold in those markets a lot of time. This gives a really streamlined compliance path for those areas to deploy energy storage system without having to add a bunch of additional components and technology to be compliant there. And then from a safety perspective, the GridBOSS is a phenomenal safety device. It integrates both rapid shutdown and energy storage system disconnect and emergency stop at a single device. So you can absolutely just flip the red initiation switch on the side of the GridBOSS, and that will initiate both rapid shutdown and emergency stop, or depending on where the GridBOSS is placed and what your AHJ requires, we can also support an external e-stop button be deployed on site to again give emergency responders a very easy single location to go ahead and initiate system shutdown of the device and now have a safe pathway to respond to whatever emergency might be present on that home or property. And we just put out a really great video kind of showing some of this functionality and how you can go about that. Please go ahead and check that out if you haven't already. It is available on the EG4 Power Station. It is available on YouTube. And if you want to get the link to that YouTube, it's unlisted, but we're happy to share that with you so you can review that, get a little bit more familiar with how e-stop and RSD work with a GridBOSS device. And then finally, talking about the actual supported inverter technology here, the GridBOSS is an EG4 piece of equipment. So all these great benefits we've talked about today are available across the lineup of EG4 hybrid inverters. So that would be our KPV and FlexBOSS line of inverters. I'll also say that as we continue to develop solutions in the future, the GridBOSS is a foundational piece of equipment for us and one that will support additional inverters that we develop in the future. It does not support third-party inverters. That is a question that we frequently get. Unfortunately, this GridBOSS device is only intended to be used with EG4 inverters. I say unfortunately, it's actually fortunate because you're going to get the best hybrid inverter on the market with the best MID solution on the market. So locking you into a great solution there. And then I kind of touched on it.
Not to say you can AC couple other existing systems into the smart ports. However, right, this is dedicated. There are hybrid inverter ports made for EG4. The reason you get into this ecosystem is to integrate our inverters and our energy storage system. But yeah, there is room for existing solar to go in there. Sorry, Dale.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that, Joel. Yeah, absolutely, guys. The implication there is from a islanding device standpoint. So the ability to safely disconnect from the grid and continue to island power to the home, you will need the EG4 inverter to have that capability and that functionality. There's some proprietary communication that happens between the two devices to ensure that happens in a safe and code compliant manner. And then I'll just put it out there. I love to champion our support team. I kind of talked about it with Joel and his team. Our technical support team is phenomenal as well. Please let us know how we can support you guys in the field, whether that be, like I said earlier, Joel and his team on the front end of a deployment with design, with potentially a commissioning pathway that's going to be ensuring that that solution is deployed against the application case that it was sold into, or certainly as that solution is fielded and you're just wanting some ad hoc support from our team. We're open 7 days a week for extended hours, so we can hit both our partners on the East Coast as well as the West Coast, and even down into Hawaii. And we also will support on-demand training, commissioning support, whatever we can do to set you up for success with EG4 equipment, we certainly are willing and capable of doing. With that said, I will thank everybody for joining today. We'll take some time to answer some questions here. Next week, we will be at Intersolar in San Diego. So if you are planning on being in attendance, please come by and see us. We're going to be in booth 3235. Both Joel and myself will be in attendance. Would love to see you there, shake your hand, show you the GridBOSS device in person, and talk a little bit more about it or any of our other EG4 solutions. If I can ask one additional thing from everybody in attendance here, we'd love to get your feedback. So here on the bottom of the slide, you will see a QR code. That's just a link to a survey. If you wouldn't mind going and taking that survey, telling us what you liked about this webinar, what you didn't like, we'll certainly add that in, or that feedback in, for future webinars and iterations. With that said, Joel, I'll turn it over to you. Any good questions that we want to focus on or make sure that we answer here for the group? We are at the top of the hour. We went almost the full hour because we love to talk about the solution, but happy to stick around and get any last questions answered.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things we can jump into. One specifically around the smart ports. On the smart port side, we have 4 different ports. One of them is rated to 120 amps, 2 of them to 60, and 1 of them to 80, which means you have a pretty significant amount of loads that you're able to back up. I'd say a very common use case is backing up sub panels. If you're doing a larger home, maybe that barn doesn't have the inverter on it, but they have a very, very large sub panel out there. Being able to back up sub panels with the smart ports is very, very common. I would say that would be good practice. It gives you the ability to shed a significant amount of loads, as well as simplifying your installs, where things are going. When it gets to bigger systems, a lot of times, we'll be presented with a 400 amp system. And that's something we didn't talk about too much today, is how we service 400 amp systems. I know a lot of those homeowners are still looking for a device similar to a GridBOSS. Some of those units may already have generators on there. They may already have solar on there. So the likelihood of wanting to integrate a GridBOSS is usually going to be fairly high there. We do support 400 amp service. you can parallel two of our GridBOSSes next to each other. That also allows you to do a few things like paralleling a generator into both of those generator ports. Our generator port is limited to 125 amps. I believe that's right around 30 kilowatts on the wattage side there. So again, if you have a slightly bigger generator, and the homeowner had already bought it, they bought a 50 kilowatt generator. They're 400 amp service, and they've got two GridBOSSes. Well, situation like that, again, I don't want to get everyone into a lot of custom work or custom integrations on this call here. It's not quite what we're for, but it is something that is supported. We can do 400 amp backup. You can parallel loads getting split between two of our GridBOSSes. From my understanding right now, we are working to improve the software integration of running two of those GridBOSSes in parallel. It is supported. We will back you up doing that, but we are currently working to make it even smoother of a process and a cleaner end product for the customer as they're logging into their station. We want to make sure that all of that data is visible kind of right where they would expect it. So there's a few little improvements we're making there, but it is something that we absolutely support.
Joel, you're maybe sharing some information that I wasn't privy to here. I know certainly paralleling GridBOSS is something that our team was developing, and I was excited to maybe present here today. Last I had asked, which has been a few weeks or a couple weeks, I think they were told they were still in development. Have we officially released that feature?
I guess, yeah, it is in that product. I would say we have installers who do 400 amp services using two GridBOSSes every week. That is something that is currently going on. The software is improving so that, again, we can parallel them fully and appropriately through our monitoring portal. Again, I can't speak exactly. Those improvements happen very rapidly, so I don't know exactly where they are sitting. I know where they're going, but I don't know where they stand today. I do know that if you have a homeowner who's asking you to back up their 400 amp service, if you showed up with two GridBOSSes, I'm pretty darn sure we'll be able to come up with a solution that would make everyone on site happy. Again, we are working to improve a little bit more on that software integration side for the customer on the back end to make it more cohesive.
Great. Thank you, Joel. Yeah, exciting stuff, guys. Continuing to improve on the product line, not only with firmware and software implementation and improvements, but some physical hardware improvement that we'll probably announcing not anytime soon, but certainly there's always discussions that we're having where we're looking, hey, what can we do to make this a more usable, more effective product for our customers? So would absolutely love that feedback as you guys have application cases where you're saying, hey, the GridBOSS does 97% of the things I've ever needed it to do, but I have this one that it doesn't do. We'd love to hear about it, consider some engineering solutions, and how do we make that available for you guys as our customers so you can continue to opt into EG4 solutions.
Still see a few questions here. Can you speak about the bus bar control with the EG4's way to avoid panel upgrades with PV systems with east to west arrays? So that one as well, the GridBOSS has CTs along all of its loads, right? So it has its own internal bus bar. One of the things that we've integrated within 2025 feature is our bus bar PCS, right? So if you have an existing panel and you're landing multiple inverters on it, generally, because if you have 200 amp service and you're on 200 amp bar, you have that 125% rule. If you're adding a lot of solar to that, right, you'd have to downgrade your service panel. I think that's kind of where this question is coming from. When you're using the GridBOSS or other inverters with a CT, you can set that bus bar rating with bus bar PCS. So, hey, I've got a 200 amp bus bar that we're landing on here. You'd put that into our portal on our monitoring platform, and then you'd make sure that you're never going to exceed the 200 amp rating of the bus based off the loads. But again, generally with the GridBOSS, that's going to be a non-issue because all of that's going to be built within. That's like an automatic control.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well stated, Joel. Yeah, generally speaking, the PCS functionality is not critically important because the GridBOSS is rated to accept more power, frankly, than the 3 hybrid inverters connected to it would be able to deliver. But if you have a downstream load center, for example, where that becomes consideration, that still would be supported with our power control system functionality.
Can THD waveform quality or internal limits cause a GridBOSS to run loads from a generator, but prevent the battery from charging. So actually, I would almost expect it to be the opposite, and maybe I'm out of place saying that. Generally, poor power quality is going to cause issues with your loads. We do have a piece of equipment called the chargeverter, and one of the specialties there is that chargeverter can take extremely dirty power and it can turn it directly into DC power. And that way, right, you can take, and again, maybe someone's just got an old Harbor Freight generator that's been sitting in their garage and they think it'd be an amazing idea to integrate that into their home power system. So you install a GridBOSS and an EG4 system. And then you realize there's almost nothing in that home you'd be willing to power with the dirty power from a cheap generator like that. In a situation where you don't want to be blowing up transformers or equipment in the home, maybe fancy TVs or stereo systems, situation like that would be a great case to use a chargeverter, where you can take dirty power, unreliable power, some with a total harmonic distortion well beyond our limits, clean that into DC power, and then making sure now all of the power on the home is going to come from our EG4 inverters. That power is going to be exceptionally clean once it's been pushed through the battery and then back out through the inverter. So if you have bad power coming from a generator, I would recommend trying to integrate a chargeverter if you don't have other options there. I hope that answers your question there, Fabian. If not, feel free to throw another one in there. Yeah, Fabian, it sounds like you have another question on a current system. I would recommend, I can make myself and my team available. Depending on where your location is, I can make sure we loop in the right guy for you. Without getting too far into it, I don't want to start speculating on a system that I haven't seen. I do have a couple of things that come to mind. Generally, I think a lot of people will, I'll stop there. Fabian, we can jump into a call and we'll make sure that we get this generator GridBOSS integration cooking for you.
Hey, Joel, Craig just asked a question around GridBOSS knockouts on our conduit boxes, but more specifically, or providing an EG4 non-punch box. Okay. Just wanted to make clear, certainly these solutions are compatible with a non-EG4 gutter. That's a common misconception. I misunderstood your question here, Craig, and that's not what you were asking necessarily. But if it does come to pass where it makes sense to use kind of an off-the-shelf wire gutter, a non-EG4 quote-unquote conduit box solution, that certainly is supported with the technology. There are continuing improvements with the conduit boxes, both from a certifications standpoint, where we're actually certifying to outdoor ratings in the future, which, to your point, Craig, has not always been the case with some of our solutions. And then from a knockout perspective, I do believe there's some updates coming there, but I will have to double check with our R&D to confirm that it's exactly what you're asking about, which is alignment with the GridBOSS. So certainly a good one to follow up on for you there, Craig.
And yeah, Fabian, you don't need a chargeverter for all generators. I would say only for the generators that have very poor harmonic distortion, where you want to be protecting very sensitive electronics inside the home. I'd say that's a common situation where you would be maybe looking to include a chargeverter. I would say if you have a real prepper guy who has a cheap Chinese-made like wind turbine that produces 200 watts on a good day, and it's got a really, really bad weight. Something like that you would definitely want to push that into a chargeverter to make sure that any of that power is going to be clean and is going to be usable. There's a number of places that you can get very bad power, and sometimes, yeah, we're taking power from different sources, different locations. The chargeverter can be a great equalizer, but it's not something I would say is required in the vast majority of systems. It's kind of I don't know, secret weapon, I guess, in there, a silver bullet in case you ever need it. As follow-up, would be very beneficial for the GridBOSS and the FlexBOSS wall bracket attachments were the same height to use with the strut. That is good feedback. Yeah, no, that's Craig, I agree. It would be very beneficial to make sure that all of those are going to be at the same height there for you. I think the conduit boxes, the mounting structures, and things like that are all things that are currently, under consideration. General engineering team is taking a pretty close look at those. One of the things we do consider is when we make changes to any of those, it always makes a difference to where the knockouts land within our current systems, our current conduit boxes and things. So it's usually not as simple as just being able to make one little tweak to line things up better. But yeah, Craig, as you say, the more we can make things exactly the same, the easier your installs are going to be. I agree with you there. I think that's just about all of the questions I see on here. We're missing any?
Fabian had some feedback on Support Center. Yeah, Fabian, if you haven't already, we last webinar had a discussion around some of the improvements that are ongoing with our support team. Definitely encourage you to watch that webinar if you didn't get the chance to attend. It is a acknowledged concern. We are adding headcount on a daily basis, and as those individuals get onboarded enough to speed, we are seeing some relief there, but certainly it is something that we're continuing to improve on and get those wait times to be more manageable for our partners. So I do appreciate that feedback.
And yeah, again, please go back and take a look at the webinars. We did create a system, right? We have essentially our installer only call line, as well as our general support line. So the installers who work with us, who talk with my team, who go through our LMS and our power station training, they're going to have access to the installer only support line, which we expect will have much shorter lines, a lot less wait, as well as you'll have direct access to book calls with my team, the technical account managers. So, I know you mentioned, hey, you've got an integration with a generator that's not quite going well. That would be a great time to book a call with my team so we can start looking at solutions for you. And my team is schedulable. We're not necessarily people you can just pick up on the phone on a whim. But if you can go into Power Station and pull up our calendars, we're generally very easy to get a hold of that way. And then we can be dedicated to you. We can leverage the resources at EG4, including our support team, to make sure you're getting the solutions. But that way we kind of become, white glove treatment or your advocate to make sure whatever resolution you're looking for your company is going to get delivered on. And you have one point of contact who can kind of walk you all the way through. That's something that's specifically available to our installers who go through Power Station and get certified with us. I think that's the vast majority of the people who are on the call today. So if you haven't done that already, please do. If you have done it already and you're curious who I'm talking about, please check out the forums section. We have the technical product training, commissioning training, and design training. Those are all meetings with your technical account manager who will spend the time with you, who will go over individual systems with you, and any commissioning questions you might have. Truly here to make sure you're successful. Use us and abuse us. That's what we want to do. The lugs inside the GridBOSS are now rated for aluminum, Clayton. That's a great question there. I don't have a specific temperature rating for those lugs within the GridBOSS, but they are aluminum rated. That's correct.
Appreciate everybody's attendance here, and hopefully this was beneficial and you guys learned something, like I said. But please give that feedback. Reach out to us if you don't have any. Joel, thank you for your immense knowledge and support on the webinar.
Thanks, everyone.